Before we begin tonight's journey, find a comfortable place to rest. Dim the lights if you can. Settle beneath a warm blanket and let the noise of the day slowly drift away. Tonight, we travel back through nearly a century to meet a woman whose life seems almost too extraordinary to be true. She was celebrated as one of the most beautiful movie stars ever to appear on the silver screen. Millions admired her face, but very few understood her mind. Hidden behind the glamour of Hollywood was an inventor whose ideas would eventually help shape the wireless world we live in today. As always, this story is based on historical research, though some conversations and descriptions have been gently imagined to create a relaxing listening experience. Our purpose is not dramatic suspense, but quiet reflection on a remarkable life. Now, close your eyes if you wish. Take one slow breath and let us begin. Long before smartphones connected people across oceans, before satellites orbited silently above the earth, before Wi-Fi filled homes with invisible signals, a young girl sat near a window in Vienna, asking endless questions about how the world worked. She was born on November 9, 1914, in the beautiful city of Vienna, then part of the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire. Her birth name was Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler, though history would remember her by another name entirely, Hedy Lamarr. Vienna during the early 20th century was a city of elegance. Horse-drawn carriages still traveled alongside electric trams. Grand concert halls echoed with the music of Mozart and Strauss. Cafes welcomed philosophers, artists, musicians, and scientists. The city carried itself with confidence, even as Europe slowly moved toward enormous change. Hedy's father, Emil Kiesler, was a successful bank director. Her mother, Gertrude, had once dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. Together, they encouraged curiosity, although perhaps none of them realized just how curious their daughter would become. Her father enjoyed taking long walks through Vienna with little Hedy. During these walks, he explained everything they encountered. Why did the streetcars move? How did printing presses work? What made clocks keep time? If they passed a factory, he described the machines inside. If they crossed a bridge, he explained its engineering. Every ordinary object became an opportunity for discovery. Years later, Hedy would remember these conversations as some of the happiest moments of her childhood. Unlike many children who simply accepted the world as it appeared, she wanted to know what existed beneath the surface. If a music box stopped working, she wanted to open it. If a toy broke, she wondered how to repair it instead of throwing it away. This quiet fascination with machinery would remain with her throughout her entire life. At school, she proved intelligent and observant. Teachers noticed she learned quickly, especially when subjects required logic or memory. But another quality also drew attention. She possessed extraordinary beauty. Friends and strangers alike commented on her striking dark hair, expressive eyes, and graceful appearance, even while she was still very young. By her teenage years, opportunities in the performing arts began appearing. Vienna possessed a thriving theater community, and motion pictures were rapidly becoming one of the world's most exciting new forms of entertainment. Films during the late 1920s and early 1930s carried audiences into worlds of romance, adventure, and mystery. For many young people, becoming an actor represented both artistic ambition and personal freedom. Hedy felt drawn toward this world. She began studying acting under respected theater director Max Reinhardt, whose students learned discipline as much as performance. Reinhardt believed actors should understand emotion through careful observation rather than exaggerated gestures. His lessons suited Hedy perfectly. She paid attention to tiny details, the movement of hands, subtle expressions, quiet pauses between words. Soon, she earned small film roles within the Austrian and German film industries. The European cinema of this period differed greatly from modern filmmaking. Cameras were large and heavy. Bright studio lights generated tremendous heat. Every scene required patience. Actors often repeated simple movements dozens of times, while technicians adjusted equipment. For Hedy, filmmaking became another fascinating machine to understand. She observed cameras, lighting equipment, sound recording systems, editing rooms, while other performers relaxed between scenes. She often wandered the studio, studying the technology surrounding movie production. Few noticed. Everyone remained focused on her appearance. In 1933, when she was only 18 years old, Hedy appeared in a Czech film called Ecstasy. The movie became one of the most controversial European films of its era. Today, it might appear relatively modest, but in the conservative society of the 1930s, it shocked audiences across Europe and America because of brief scenes of nudity and its unusually open portrayal of romance. Many countries banned the film. Others censored it heavily. Newspapers debated it endlessly. Almost overnight, Hedy became internationally famous. Yet this sudden fame carried consequences. she could never have imagined. Among those who saw her was one of Europe's wealthiest industrialists, Friedrich Mandl. Mandl manufactured weapons and military equipment. His factories supplied ammunition and technology to governments across Europe during an increasingly dangerous political climate. He was enormously wealthy. He was influential, and he became determined to marry the young actress. Despite objections from some family members and friends, Hedy accepted his proposal in 1933. She was only 19 years old. At first, the marriage appeared luxurious beyond imagination. The couple lived in magnificent estates. Servants attended every need. Elegant dinners welcomed politicians, military officers, and wealthy businessmen. Yet beneath this glamorous surface lay something much darker. Mandl proved deeply controlling. He disliked Hedy's acting career. He reportedly attempted to purchase every copy of Ecstasy that he could find, hoping to erase the film from public memory. He expected his wife to remain largely within the household. Travel required permission. Professional ambitions faded. Freedom became increasingly limited. Although surrounded by unimaginable wealth, Hedy later described these years as feeling trapped inside a beautiful prison. Ironically, this difficult marriage introduced her to knowledge that would eventually change history. Mandl frequently hosted private dinners attended by military engineers, scientists, aircraft designers, and weapons specialists. At these gatherings, conversations often turned toward new technologies: radar, aircraft, communication systems, guided weapons, radio frequencies. Most guests ignored the quiet young woman seated nearby. They assumed she understood little. Instead, Hedy listened carefully. Night after night, year after year, she absorbed discussions about engineering problems, military communications, and technological limitations. Without realizing it, the businessmen around the dinner table were providing an education unavailable at almost any university. Hedy stored every detail away in her remarkable memory. Meanwhile, Europe itself was changing rapidly. The wounds left by the First World War had never fully healed. Economic hardship spread across many countries. Political extremism grew stronger. In neighboring Germany, Adolf Hitler had risen to power in 1933. Across the continent, uncertainty quietly settled over everyday life. Many sensed another great conflict approaching, though few imagined its scale. Inside Mandl's mansion, Hedy increasingly dreamed of escape, not simply from an unhappy marriage, toward a future where she could decide her own path. According to later accounts, she carefully planned her departure. Some stories claim she disguised herself as a servant. Others suggest she quietly slipped away while traveling. Historians continue debating the exact details. What remains certain is that by 1937, she had successfully escaped Austria, leaving behind extraordinary wealth in exchange for something far more valuable: freedom, with little more than determination and remarkable courage. The young woman once known as Hedwig Kiesler began a journey westward. She first reached London. She carried no guarantee of success, no certainty about her future, only hope. She could not possibly know that within only a few years, she would become one of Hollywood's greatest stars. Nor could she imagine that decades later, the scientific ideas forming quietly inside her curious mind would help build the technological foundations of the modern wireless age. Those discoveries, however, still lay far ahead. For now, our traveler stood alone in a foreign city, watching ships arrive and depart across gray waters, wondering what kind of life awaited on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. The cool autumn air drifting across London's harbor carried with it the scent of coal smoke, seawater, and possibility. For Hedy, every passing ship represented another chance to begin again. She had left behind privilege, wealth, and a carefully decorated prison. Ahead lay uncertainty. Yet uncertainty, she would later discover, often grants more freedom than certainty ever can. The idea arrived quietly, not with the dramatic flash of inspiration so often shown in films, but through long conversations, patient thought, and a willingness to look at an old problem from a completely different angle. During the early years of the Second World War, Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil continued meeting whenever their schedules allowed. One came from the glamorous world of Hollywood, the other from the unconventional world of experimental music. Together, they shared something perhaps even more valuable than fame or artistic talent. They were curious. Curiosity has often been one of history's greatest inventors. The military challenge before them seemed straightforward to describe, but remarkably difficult to solve. Radio-controlled torpedoes relied upon a single radio frequency. If an enemy discovered that frequency, they could broadcast interference powerful enough to overwhelm the signal. The torpedo would lose contact with its operator, drift off course, or become useless altogether. The problem was much like trying to carry on a conversation in a crowded room while someone shouted directly into your ear. But what if the conversation did not stay on one frequency? What if both the transmitter and receiver could move together from one channel to another so quickly that no one could predict where they would be next? The signal would become extraordinarily difficult to interrupt. The concept seems familiar today because modern technology quietly performs similar tasks every moment. Our phones, wireless networks, Bluetooth devices, and satellite communications all depend upon sophisticated methods of sharing radio frequencies efficiently. In the early 1940s, however, such thinking was revolutionary. George Antheil's musical background unexpectedly offered a clue. Years earlier, he had written compositions requiring multiple player pianos to perform together with perfect synchronization. Each piano followed a precisely arranged paper roll filled with tiny holes that controlled every note. Antheil wondered, could two machines use a similar principle? Could a transmitter and receiver both follow identical patterns, changing radio frequencies together at precisely the same instant? Hedy immediately recognized the possibility. Together, they imagined a communication system in which both devices would hop rapidly between many different frequencies. Unless someone knew the exact sequence in advance, intercepting or jamming the transmission would become extraordinarily difficult. It was an elegant solution, simple in concept, remarkably advanced in execution. The pair spent months refining their design. They studied engineering references, prepared diagrams, discussed mechanisms capable of maintaining perfect synchronization. Eventually, they developed a complete system based upon frequency hopping. In June 1941, they filed a patent application. The following year, in August 1942, the United States officially granted patent number 2,290,2387. The invention carried a technical title, Secret Communication System. Today, historians widely recognize it as one of the earliest practical descriptions of frequency hopping, spread spectrum communication. At the time, however, almost no one fully appreciated its significance. The United States Navy examined the proposal. Military engineers acknowledged the creativity behind the design, but ultimately chose not to adopt it immediately. Several reasons have been suggested over the decades. Some believed the mechanical synchronization system would prove too complicated for torpedoes of the era. Others questioned whether wartime production could accommodate such unfamiliar technology. And perhaps, though no official document says so directly, Some simply struggled to imagine that an actress and a composer had solved a problem that professional military researchers had not. Whether because of technical limitations, institutional caution, or simple skepticism, the invention was placed aside. The patent entered government files. Years passed. The war continued. Hedy never complained publicly. She did not demand recognition. Instead, government officials encouraged her to contribute in another way. Her celebrity. During the war, Hedy became one of America's most successful fundraisers. She appeared at rallies, signed autographs, spoke to enormous audiences, promoted the purchase of war bonds. At one famous fundraising event, organizers announced that anyone purchasing a sufficiently large amount of war bonds could receive a kiss from Hedy Lamarr. The idea captured the public imagination. Crowds eagerly participated. Millions of dollars flowed into the American war effort. Newspapers celebrated the campaign. Photographs spread across the country. Once again, the world admired her beauty. Few realized that the same woman standing gracefully before cameras had recently received a United States patent for a sophisticated communications invention. Hollywood also remained busy. Throughout the 1940s, Hedy appeared in a steady stream of successful films. She starred alongside many of the era's most respected actors. Audiences filled theaters to watch romantic adventures, historical dramas, mysteries, and comedies. Among her best-known performances was Samson and Delilah. Released in 1949 under the direction of Cecil B. DeMille, the lavish biblical epic became one of the biggest box office successes of its time. Hedy portrayed Delilah with elegance, intelligence, and emotional complexity. The film strengthened her reputation as one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Magazine editors continued placing her on their covers. Fashion designers admired her style. Photographers praised the remarkable symmetry of her face. Decades later, some historians would note that Walt Disney's artists are believed to have drawn inspiration from Hedy's appearance while developing the character of Snow White. Although accounts differ regarding the extent of that influence, whether entirely true or partly legendary, the comparison reflected how deeply her image had entered popular culture. Yet life away from movie sets rarely matched the polished perfection audiences imagined. The pressures of constant fame weighed heavily. Studios carefully managed public images. Actors often worked exhausting schedules. Relationships came and went. Hedy married several times over the course of her life. She became the mother of 3 children and did her best to balance family life with an unusually demanding career. She loved her children deeply, although maintaining stability proved difficult amid the relentless attention surrounding Hollywood celebrities. At home, however, she remained the same curious inventor she had always been. Friends recalled seeing notebooks filled with ideas, household improvements, mechanical sketches, scientific articles. She reportedly experimented with better traffic lights, improved beverage tablets, and other practical inventions that reflected her lifelong habit of looking for ways to improve ordinary objects. Not every idea became a patent. That hardly mattered. For Hedy, inventing was never simply about profit. It was about understanding, about asking why something worked, and whether it might work better. As the years passed, Hollywood itself changed. The great studio system that had dominated American filmmaking for decades gradually weakened. Television entered millions of homes. Audience tastes evolved. New generations of actors arrived. Like many stars of the Golden Age, Hedy found fewer leading roles available as she grew older. Such transitions were often difficult for performers whose identities had become closely connected with public admiration. She continued acting occasionally, but the extraordinary fame of the 1940s slowly faded. Outside Hollywood, something remarkable was quietly happening. Engineers continued advancing electronic communications. Vacuum tubes gave way to transistors. Computers gradually became smaller. Radio technology improved year after year. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, military researchers revisited ideas remarkably similar to those described in Hedy and George Antheil's patent. This time, technology had finally caught up. Electronic components had become far smaller and more reliable than the mechanical systems available during World War II. Frequency hopping no longer seemed impractical. Instead, it appeared visionary. Engineers incorporated versions of spread-spectrum communication into secure military systems, including communications used during the Cold War. The original patent itself had expired by then. Neither Hedy nor George received financial rewards from these later developments. Patents, after all, protect inventions only for a limited period. The timing proved unfortunate. Their idea had arrived decades before the technology necessary to use it widely. History sometimes works this way. An invention may appear before the world is ready. the seed is planted. Only years later does it bloom, as electronic communications continued evolving throughout the 20th century. Engineers built upon principles remarkably close to those Hedy and George had imagined around a dining room table during the darkest years of World War II. Invisible radio signals now leaped effortlessly across changing frequencies. Information traveled securely through the air. The invention once considered too unusual had quietly become part of the future. Yet outside scientific circles, almost no one associated this remarkable achievement with the glamorous actress whose face still appeared in classic Hollywood films. To most people, Hedy Lamarr remained simply a movie star. The inventor had been almost completely forgotten. But history has an interesting habit of rediscovering overlooked people. And as we shall see in the final chapter of our journey, recognition would eventually arrive, though much later than Hedy could ever have expected. And only after decades of silence had nearly hidden one of the 20th century's most extraordinary stories. London in 1937 was a city balancing between elegance and anxiety. Gentlemen in tailored suits hurried through the streets carrying newspapers filled with troubling headlines from continental Europe. Across the English Channel, Adolf Hitler's Germany was growing stronger each month. Diplomats spoke publicly of peace while privately preparing for war. Ordinary citizens carried on with daily life, though many quietly sensed that another storm was gathering over Europe. Among the distinguished travelers staying in London that season was one of the most powerful men in the American film industry, Louis B. Mayer, the head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, better known simply as MGM. Mayer had spent weeks searching Europe for promising new talent to bring back to Hollywood. The American film industry had entered what many now call its golden age. Talking pictures had replaced silent films. Lavish productions dazzled audiences during the hardships of the Great Depression. And movie stars had become some of the most recognizable faces on Earth. Hedy hoped for an opportunity, though she knew competition was fierce. Countless young actors dreamed of crossing the Atlantic to appear in American films. Many never received the chance. History tells us that Hedy eventually met Mayer, although the details differ depending on the source. Some accounts suggest he initially offered her an unremarkable contract that she politely declined. Rather than accepting less than she believed she deserved, she made a bold decision. Instead of remaining behind in Europe, she booked passage on the very same ocean liner that would carry Mayer back to America. The crossing aboard the great passenger ship lasted several days. ocean liners of the 1930s were floating cities, complete with elegant dining rooms, libraries, orchestras, smoking lounges, and broad decks where travelers spent hours watching the endless Atlantic horizon. During that voyage, Hedy spoke with Mayer often. She impressed him not only with her remarkable appearance, but also with her intelligence, confidence, and determination. Unlike many hopeful actresses, she possessed both sophistication and resilience. She understood several languages, carried herself with calm dignity, and displayed a quiet curiosity about nearly everything. By the time the ship approached New York Harbor, Mayer had changed his mind completely. He offered her a far more generous contract with MGM. He also suggested a new name. Hollywood loved memorable names that audiences could easily recognize. Hedwig Kiesler, while perfectly respectable in Europe, did not fit the glamorous image the studios wanted to create. She became Hedy Lamarr. The surname honored Barbara Lamarr, a silent film actress who had died years earlier. The new identity sounded elegant, mysterious, and unforgettable. Soon afterward, Hedy traveled west to California. Hollywood in the late 1930s was unlike any other place in the world. Palm trees lined wide boulevards beneath endless sunshine. Massive studio lots contained entire cities built only for cameras. Medieval castles stood beside New York streets. Egyptian temples might be only a short walk from Parisian cafes. Behind enormous soundstage doors, imagination became architecture. The Hollywood studio system operated almost like a kingdom. Major studios controlled nearly every aspect of an actor's professional life. They selected scripts, assigned directors, arranged publicity, approved hairstyles, designed wardrobes, and sometimes even influenced personal relationships. Stardom offered extraordinary rewards, but it often demanded considerable sacrifice. For Hedy, everything was new. The scale of American filmmaking amazed her. Hundreds of technicians worked behind every production. Cameramen adjusted enormous machines with remarkable precision. Costume departments employed countless designers and seamstresses. Artists painted vast landscapes on studio backdrops. Lighting crews transformed empty rooms into castles, deserts, or royal palaces through carefully positioned lamps. As she had done years earlier in Europe, Hedy quietly observed the machinery surrounding her. While many admired only the glamour, she remained fascinated by the technology hidden behind every illusion. Her first American film, Algiers, premiered in 1938. Audiences were immediately captivated. The film itself received praise, but much of the public conversation centered on Hedy herself. Critics struggled to describe her appearance. Newspapers called her the most beautiful woman in the world. Magazine covers featured her elegant portraits. Photographers competed for opportunities to capture her image. Beauty became both her greatest advantage and her greatest limitation. Hollywood loved presenting her as an exotic mystery. Producers often cast her as glamorous aristocrats, mysterious strangers, or enchanting women whose appearance alone transformed every scene. Few directors asked her to portray the depth of her personality. Even fewer imagined that after long days on set, this celebrated actress preferred spending evenings reading scientific journals, studying engineering ideas, or experimenting with inventions around the house. Friends later remembered visiting Hedy's home and finding unusual projects spread across tables. She enjoyed taking apart mechanical devices simply to understand how they functioned. She examined clocks, music boxes, household appliances. If something stopped working, she rarely threw it away. She opened it, studied it, tried to repair it. This habit had begun during childhood with her father and had never disappeared. One story, repeated by several biographers, describes her improving the design of a traffic signal after considering ways it might operate more efficiently. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate remains uncertain, but the story reflects a consistent truth about her personality. She viewed ordinary objects not as finished products, but as puzzles waiting to be improved. Despite growing fame, Hedy's personal life remained complicated. She married several times throughout her life. Each marriage began with hope, but eventually encountered difficulties. Hollywood itself could be an exhausting environment where constant publicity placed enormous pressure on relationships. Newspapers eagerly reported romances. Photographers waited outside restaurants. Columnists invented stories whenever genuine news proved unavailable. Privacy became increasingly rare. Yet through changing relationships and demanding film schedules, another passion quietly endured: inventing. Then the world changed. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The Second World War had begun. For Hedy, this was not distant news from another continent. It was deeply personal. She had grown up in Austria. She had watched Europe drift toward catastrophe. Many people she had known remained there, Some were Jewish, including members of her own family. Many would soon face unimaginable danger. Although she now lived safely in America, she could not ignore the suffering unfolding across the Atlantic. Hollywood quickly joined the national effort to support the Allied cause. Actors sold war bonds. Studios produced patriotic films. Celebrities participated in charity events and fundraising campaigns. Hedy eagerly contributed. She became one of Hollywood's most successful war bond promoters. During public appearances, enormous crowds gathered simply to see her in person. Millions of dollars were raised to support the American war effort. Most people assumed that was the greatest contribution a movie star could make. Hedy believed otherwise. She wanted to solve problems. One particular military problem captured her imagination. German submarines, known as U-boats, posed a terrifying threat in the Atlantic Ocean. They hunted Allied cargo ships carrying food, fuel, equipment, and soldiers between North America and Europe. Engineers had already developed radio-controlled torpedoes capable of being guided toward enemy ships. In theory, such weapons promised remarkable accuracy. In practice, they suffered from one fatal weakness. The radio signal controlling the torpedo could be detected. An enemy could interfere with the transmission. They could jam the signal. Once jammed, the torpedo became nearly useless. Military engineers had struggled with this problem for years. Many considered it nearly impossible to solve. Hedy remembered conversations she had overheard years earlier during dinners hosted by Friedrich Mandl. Officers and engineers had discussed radio frequencies, communications, and electronic interference. Those forgotten conversations suddenly returned to her memory. Perhaps there was another way. Around this time, Hedy became friends with an unusual man named George Antheil. Unlike military engineers, Antheil was a composer. He was famous for experimental music that challenged traditional ideas about rhythm and machinery. One of his most famous compositions had even synchronized multiple player pianos operating together automatically. At first glance, an actress and an avant-garde composer might seem unlikely partners for scientific invention. Yet curiosity often brings together unexpected minds. They began discussing the torpedo problem. How could a radio signal avoid being jammed? How might two machines remain perfectly synchronized while constantly changing communication channels? Long conversations followed. Sketches covered sheets of paper. Ideas were tested, discarded, improved, neither could know that they were standing at the beginning of one of the most remarkable inventions of the 20th century, an invention born not inside a government laboratory, not within a military research center, but in conversations between one Hollywood actress and one experimental composer, both imagining that perhaps the impossible simply required looking at the problem from an entirely different direction. In the next part of our story, we will follow Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil as they develop an invention far ahead of its time, one that would be ignored for years, before quietly transforming the modern world in ways neither inventor could have imagined. By the 1960s and 1970s, the brilliant lights of Hollywood had begun to shine on a new generation of stars. The grand movie palaces that had once displayed Hedy Lamarr's name in enormous glowing letters gradually replaced old posters with new faces. Time, as it always does, continued its quiet journey forward. For Hedy, the transition was not always easy. The woman once described as the most beautiful actress in the world found herself living an increasingly private life. Fame is often brightest in the moment, but surprisingly fragile across the decades. Audiences change. Fashion changes. The entertainment industry moves constantly toward the next sensation. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Hedy rarely seemed interested in celebrating her own past. She granted relatively few interviews and preferred to remain out of the public eye. Friends described her as intelligent, independent, and sometimes guarded, a woman who had spent much of her life being admired without always being understood. There were also personal hardships. Several of her marriages had ended in divorce. Financial difficulties occasionally appeared despite years of successful film work. She experienced legal disputes and periods of loneliness. As she grew older, her eyesight gradually weakened, making reading and inventing more difficult than before. Yet through all these changes, one remarkable fact remained almost unknown outside engineering circles. The actress whose image had defined Hollywood glamour had also helped imagine one of the most important communication technologies of the modern age. For decades, very few people recognized that connection. The patent she and George Antheil had received in 1942 quietly expired years earlier, without bringing either inventor significant financial reward. Because the military did not widely adopt the technology during the Second World War, their work faded into government archives. Then slowly, history began to change its mind. During the final decades of the 20th century, engineers developing digital communication systems increasingly relied upon spread-spectrum technology. Improvements in electronics had made rapid frequency switching practical. Instead of mechanical synchronization using paper rolls, tiny electronic circuits now performed the task effortlessly. Wireless communication expanded rapidly. Military communications became more secure. Satellite systems improved. Eventually, consumer technology followed. Although modern Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and many wireless communication systems are the result of contributions from thousands of engineers over many decades. One important building block can be traced back to the frequency hopping concept described in Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil's patent. It would be an oversimplification to say that Hedy invented Wi-Fi or created Bluetooth. Those technologies required countless later discoveries, advances in computer science, semiconductor engineering, digital networking, and international standards. But it is entirely fair to say that her patented idea became one of the early foundations upon which later wireless communication systems were built. Like the first stone laid for a great cathedral, her contribution was only one part of a much larger structure. But it was a real and meaningful part. Eventually, researchers, historians, and engineers began rediscovering the forgotten patent. Articles appeared. Books mentioned her invention. Technology experts looked more carefully at the historical record. People who had spent years thinking of Hedy only as a Hollywood actress suddenly discovered another side of her life entirely. The contrast fascinated the public. How could one of cinema's greatest stars also have been an inventor whose work helped influence modern communications? In 1997, more than half a century after receiving her patent, Hedy Lamarr finally received one of the honors she had long deserved. She and George Antheil were awarded the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award for their groundbreaking contribution to communications technology. By then, Antheil had already passed away, having died in 1959. Hedy, now in her 80s, was living quietly in Florida. Characteristically, she did not travel to the ceremony. Instead, she accepted the recognition by telephone. It was a deeply symbolic moment. The very telephone carrying voices across great distances depended upon generations of communication technology that had, in a small but significant way, grown from ideas she had helped imagine decades earlier. Not long afterward, She also became the first woman to receive the BULBIATM NAS Spirit of Achievement Award, sometimes informally referred to as the Oscars of inventing. The honor recognized innovators whose work had advanced science and technology. At last, the inventor was beginning to receive recognition alongside the actress. Perhaps even more meaningful than awards was the change in public memory. For many years, people had assumed beauty and intelligence belonged to different worlds. Hedy's life quietly challenged that assumption. She demonstrated that curiosity has no single appearance. A person admired for one talent may possess many others hidden from public view. She herself once remarked, "Any girl can be glamorous. All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." The quotation was delivered with characteristic wit, but beneath the humor lay a lifetime of frustration. Too often, people had mistaken silence for simplicity. They looked at her face. Few looked at her mind. On January 19, 2000, Hedy Lamarr died at the age of 85. She passed away peacefully in Castleberry, Florida, according to her wishes. Her son later scattered part of her ashes in the Vienna woods near the city where her remarkable journey had begun more than 85 years earlier. It was a quiet homecoming. The curious little girl who had once walked through Vienna, asking endless questions, had finally returned. Today, Hedy Lamarr occupies a unique place in history. Film historians remember her as one of the defining stars of Hollywood's golden age. Engineers remember her as an early pioneer whose ideas anticipated technologies that would become essential generations later. Historians of science increasingly include her among the many innovators whose contributions were overlooked during their own lifetimes. Schools teach her story not simply because she was famous, but because her life reminds us that human potential rarely fits inside a single label. She was an actress, an inventor, a mother, a refugee from political oppression, a survivor of an unhappy marriage, a curious child who never stopped asking how things worked. Perhaps that is the most enduring lesson her life offers. The world often encourages people to become only one thing, one profession, one identity, one carefully defined role. Hedy quietly refused. She loved art without abandoning science. She embraced imagination while pursuing engineering. She proved that creativity does not belong exclusively to painters, musicians, scientists, or inventors. It flows freely between them. As we rest tonight, surrounded by invisible wireless signals connecting homes, hospitals, aircraft, ships, satellites, and loved ones across continents. It is worth pausing for a quiet moment of gratitude, not only for Hedy Lamarr, but for all those curious minds whose names history nearly forgot. Many of humanity's greatest advances begin not with enormous laboratories or powerful governments, but with a single question asked by someone unwilling to accept that a problem has no solution. Some inventions arrive exactly when the world needs them. Others must wait patiently for decades until technology catches up with imagination. Hedy Lamarr's idea waited, and then, almost silently, it helped change the world. As the evening grows quieter, imagine Vienna once more. The streets are calm beneath a gentle evening sky. A father and his young daughter stroll past shop windows glowing with warm light. She points toward a passing streetcar and asks how it moves. He smiles, kneels beside her, and begins explaining gears, electricity, and machines. She listens carefully. She asks another question, then another. Neither of them knows what the future holds. Neither imagines Hollywood, or war, or patents, or wireless communication. They simply continue walking together through the peaceful streets, sharing curiosity with one another. Sometimes, history begins in moments so ordinary that no one notices them at all. And perhaps that is the gentlest reminder we can carry with us tonight, that every question matters, every curious child matters, every quiet idea has the possibility, however small it may seem, of reaching farther than anyone could ever imagine. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the extraordinary life of Hedy Lamarr, Hollywood's secret inventor. Now, let the story slowly fade into the quiet. Allow your thoughts to drift as gently as the evening breeze through the trees of old Vienna. Rest well, and I'll see you in the next chapter of Quiet History.